Hello and welcome back to CME Institute Spring 2020. We're in the middle of our short-term interest rate, STIRS futures sessions. This is the second of three in the foundational principles course, day one course of STIRS. And in the first segment of this session, we covered the common characteristics of STIRS futures and did a little bit of an introductory on Fed funds and Fed funds futures. Part two, this session, we're going to cover a little bit of the basic attributes of the biggest interest rate contract at CME, which is Eurodollar futures. And then in part three, we'll go into the aspects of the new secured overnight financing rate, both the cash rate and the two interest rate contracts we have on SOFR, as well as the two contracts we have on the UK's equivalent version known as SONIA. But let's jump into Eurodollars. Eurodollar futures are based on the London Interbank Offer Rate, LIBOR. It's a forward-looking 3-month LIBOR rate. And at one time, LIBOR was a hugely important rate. It was a benchmark rate used by banks primarily in the UK for interbank lending purposes. It became benchmark status in the late 1970s. The interesting thing about the Eurodollar futures contract that is based on 3-month LIBOR, it was the first financial futures contract that our regulator allowed us to list for cash settlement. So unlike the Treasury futures that still had a physical delivery mechanism embedded in their design, the Eurodollar was the first cash-settled futures contract approved by the CFTC, and it opened the door for lots of other products, both in interest rates but also equity index futures that followed shortly on its heels. LIBOR, as many of you are aware, came under an enormous amount of concern with rate fixing several years ago. There was a scandal about that, and international regulators moved very quickly to create an environment and to encourage the creation of rates that moved away from this survey model of establishing the rates. While some of the LIBOR transactions or some of the LIBOR rates were based on a limited amount of transactions, they were mostly derived from surveys of where market participants felt the market would lend capital within the banking system to each other rather than an actual transactional business. So as a result, we've moved to another reference rate, or are moving to another reference rate in the U.S. known as the secured overnight financing rate. We're going to talk about that in greater detail in the third part of this series. But getting back to Eurodollars, let's take a look at who uses them and why. This is a common chart that you've seen now in multiple presentations of data derived from the Commitment of Traders report from the CFTC. And it breaks the participants in a futures open interest down by what type of business they're engaged in. I'm not going to go through the different designations because we've covered those in previous presentations, but take a look at the Eurodollars. If you were with us for the first part of the STIRS series, we looked at Fed funds. You'll recall asset managers and institutionals were also a smaller proportion of the trading activity. But you may recall, if you recall that slide, that the Eurodollars now, that participation is slightly greater. Why is that? Well, we've got more, first of all, they're quarterly contracts. They take in a larger time frame, and we list them out 10 years, of which the first 5 to 5.5 years are very, very actively traded. So you're taking in a larger part of the yield curve. So asset managers have short-term interest rate exposure. They're involved in swaps transactions. They're interested in these and are actively interested in these rates. Notice they're both long and short and also trading in spreads. Leveraged funds, obviously also very much involved here, both long and to some degree short, but hugely involved in spread trading. We're going to talk a lot about that spread trading in the day two practical application point part of our STIRS presentation, so stay with us for that. Likewise, dealers and intermediaries still hugely involved. This is because this is where most of the swaps desks are, and the swap desks use the futures market to price their swaps curve, as well as lay off risk and create synthetic products. So you can see they're both involved, long, short, and spread. So it's a diversified marketplace of many different practitioners, and also both longs, shorts, but also huge amounts of spreading going on here. The final settlement value is determined by the ICE Benchmarks Administration, the new administrator of the LIBOR rate. And looking back to our previous presentation, we talked about IMM dates. Most of our Eurodollar contracts trade on the March quarterly cycle, March, June, September, December. This is an example of the June 2019 quarterly contract that stopped trading on the Monday, June 17th, and on that date, the ICE Benchmark Administration's determined 3-month LIBOR rate was 2.41850. Notice it goes out to the 5th decimal point. For our calculations, CME in its contract specifications takes that number down to the 4th decimal. So if it's a 5 or greater, we round the 4th digit up. In this case, it was a 0, so it's the same, 4185. Then we take that number and subtract it from 100 to arrive at the IMM price of the contract, and that becomes the final settlement value of the futures contract. Now remember that this is a 3-month rate beginning in June, covering the 3-month period from mid-June to mid-September. It's a forward-looking 3-month rate that is the underlying rate for the Eurodollar futures. I also mentioned in part 1 of the STIRS series that the basis point values of our STIRS contracts are fixed, and this is in contrast to most cash instruments of the same maturity. Floating rate notes and other money market instruments are going to have a variable or a changing value of a basis point depending on their maturity and the trading activity. Their relationship, yield to price, is said to be convex. In other words, as yields go down, their prices go up at an accelerating rate. And as yields go up, their prices go down at a decelerating rate. That's known as convexity. They exhibit convexity in their price to yield behavior. But because in the futures contracts, the basis point value is fixed, it's said to have a linear relationship price to yield. In other words, it doesn't make any difference whether price and yield are going up or down. The change in the basis point is always the same, and in Eurodollars it will always be $25. No matter where that futures contract sits on its delivery curve, it is always $25 basis point value. This introduces a concept known as convexity bias, and it's a real thing. But as rates are very, very low, and if the term of the security is very, very short, convexity bias futures relative to a cash instrument can be very, very small. If you're ever interested in measuring it or seeing it measured, there's a function on Bloomberg that will show you the convexity bias between the futures contract and a comparable swap, for example, or a forward rate. But if interest rates were higher and the term longer, the convexity bias becomes a little more significant. So if you're developing any kind of price forecasting or modeling, be cognizant of the convexity bias. In fact, convexity bias is a traded spread. Within the interdealer market, there's quite a few swaps traders that trade convexity bias spreads. So just be advised. Here are multiple yield curves of the 40 quarterly contracts, or 10 years worth of yield curve expressed in our Eurodollar futures. Going back to when we were just coming out of zero interest rates, the red line right here in the middle shows you the yield curve back at the end of 2015 when we were rising rates anticipating a steeper curve. We've had every manner of yield curves since then, from inverted curves to the most recent on this slide, the September 2019 orange market. Slight inversion at the front end of the curve, and then a slow, very slow upward steepening out about the 5th year and going forward. But this is a result of, and you can see, active trading in spreads because of the shifts, not just in the level of yields, but in the slope of the curve. So as it moves in terms of direction and slope, there are ways to capture those moves using spread trading. So I've mentioned that we've got 40 quarterly contracts, and we have 4 serial months up at the front end of the curve. That spread trading is an enormous part of this, and we're going to talk about a couple of examples of these in our second part of STIRS in the second day curriculum. So stay tuned for some of those. The third is this notion of a strip. A strip of Eurodollars is simply the simultaneous purchase or simultaneous sale of a string of consecutive quarterly futures contracts. These are commonly executed in Eurodollars. And in order to facilitate their execution, since we've got subsequent 4 quarterly contracts listed out over multiple years, it would be very easy and very quickly to become confused about which contracts you're talking about. So many, many years ago, when we were still a floor trading operation, this concept of packs and bundles was introduced to be able to designate 4 quarterly contracts executed simultaneously as a pack, and then multiples of packs in increments of 4 quarterlies done as bundles. So a pack will always be 4 sequential quarterly contracts: March, June, Sep, Dec, June, Sep, Dec, March. Those types of packs. Bundles take in additional 4 quarterly contracts. And this is the rainbow of different colors used to express those various years as you go out the curve. The year ones being the whites, the year twos being the reds, then the greens, then the blues, then the golds, and the purples. Once you get out here, there isn't nearly as much trading activity or open interest, but you do have quite a lot of participation, particularly in the first 5 years of this curve. And you'll see them regularly quoted in their color coordinates. In fact, if you look on most quoting services, they will actually put the font color in this color scheme because it's been embedded in the market for so many years. The execution of packs and bundles is done to facilitate easily being able to do some trades, and it's based on net change over previous day's settlement price. So if I wanted to execute a pack of 4 consecutive quarterly contracts, I might ask for a quote and be given something like up 2 to up 2.5 basis points. If I execute it up 2.5 basis points, my average price change from yesterday's close for those 4 quarterly contracts will be up 2.5 basis points as an average price over those 4 contracts. This has made and helped facilitate the growth of the Eurodollar futures market over the last 20 years or so as the market grew along with the swaps market. That's going to end the second part of our 3-part series on STIRS. Stay with us for the third part as we dive deeper into the foundational aspects of the secured overnight financing rate and the SOFR futures contracts, as well as our SONIA contracts. And again, if you've got any questions about what's been covered in this session or any of our previous sessions, don't hesitate to reach out to me via email for any questions you might have on any of our financial products or services. Do stay with us for future sessions on our financial futures covered in the spring 2020 edition of CME's Institute. Thank you for your time and attention today, and join us for future programming.